Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dollar Auction Show with Alex and Shimon. Shimon, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Excited about today's conversation, but yeah, overall doing great. Bitcoin is doing great, so I can't complain.
I'm doing great as well. And today in the episode, we have a very special guest. Apparently, and I'm actually super shocked by this. He just told us it's his first podcast, which we are very honored and humbled by the fact that Ken Egan is joining us today. I'll let Ken do his own intro because of various sensitivities to it. But Ken, I've spoken with Ken a bunch of times. He has a long and very storied career in the intelligence apparatus. I'll just leave it at that. And Ken, why don't you just give us a quick intro about yourself, whatever you can tell us?
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. And Shimon, nice to meet you in person. Yeah, my wife is my first podcast. My wife was surprised that anybody would want to record an hour with me. So I appreciate you guys indulging me and giving me a chance to, to at least prove her wrong once in a while. Yeah, so my name is Ken Egan. I am a retired CIA officer, retired operations officer. I left CIA in September of 2022 after circa 2 decades in service. Um, I spent the first half of my career in Middle East. I moved on to Asia issues, and the last 4 years of my career, I spent that working on cyber issues. And it was cyber issues that led me to first cryptocurrency and then Bitcoin. And I am a Bitcoiner. I've been as I say, started in the altcoin casino, but I was clear and altcoin free as of 2021, where I sold it all and put it all into Bitcoin. I've been there ever since. And it's been a tremendous journey. I think pursuing, following, getting the sort of walking down that rabbit hole. Deeper you go, it just raises more and more questions. And I always say to people about, what does Bitcoin do for you? I say, well, it illuminates, right? It doesn't show you where to go, but it illuminates and it shows you pathways and it helps you understand. And for that for me is as much as, yes, like Shimon said, I'm loving the $2,000. It's amazing. But primarily for me, I'm in this industry because I believe in what it stands for, and I believe it has. I think it will play a central role in our financial system in the years to come.
Ken, thank you for that. That's incredible. One of the first questions I have is there's this whole kind of hoopla, right? And I would love to learn a little bit more about what you've done and whatever you can tell us. But Elizabeth Warren obviously came out and talks about Hamas and terror financing and using crypto. And recently, a few days ago, the director himself of FinCEN, which is essentially the financial cybercrimes unit in the US, came out and debunked all that, saying that crypto is just a minuscule use of terror financing. You were with the agency for over 20 years. Can you tell us a little bit about, what from the inside, how does the agency or whatever you can say, or how do people in the agency view Bitcoin? Are there Bitcoiners there? Do people think that, Bitcoin is aiding, cyber or terror funding and terror crime, or is it actually a path to, track payments and stop it?
Like everything else, I think most people inside the intelligence community view Bitcoin as a tool, right? It's a tool that people use to do things. Maybe the best way to kind of walk through that is to sort of explain to you kind of where I was and how I got into it. And that sort of corresponds with the time when when Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general really became an important issue in Washington. So I entered in 2018. I took an assignment at CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence, which is CIA's cyber unit, working on cyber threat issues. In 2018, if you track these sort of things, corresponds with Lazarus Group, North Koreans, robbing altcoin platforms. Ransomware took off, right, hitting all kinds of sectors of the U.S. economy. And then 2020 was Colonial Pipeline. And it was in that time period when the policy community woke up to like, okay, what is this thing? We have to understand it. I'd heard of Bitcoin when I arrived in 2018, but I had no experience with it, nor frankly had I any interest in pursuing it. For me, it was, funny internet money. It didn't make sense to me. But you have to learn, right? When policy community is asking, what is this? What can we do about it? It turns out when you're in a place like CCI, there are a lot of smart people, engineers. I had the privilege to meet people who were home mining Bitcoin in 2013, 2014. There's a lot of engineers there, so there's a pretty sizable Ethereum crowd. And it's funny when you get into it and you start learning about it, you start to see things. So there was, for example, I remember a couple of months in, walking past a cubicle I'd walked past many times, and I saw someone had a bumper sticker pasted up saying, "We are all Satoshi." I said, I know what that is now. There's another guy who wore Ethereum T-shirts every day. I mean, the cyber center is pretty. It's a cyber center, right? So it's a little more like dressed down. So there's a community of people that are into cryptocurrency in general, and Bitcoin in particular. And of course, the more you learn about it, the more exposed to it, you start to meet people, and you start to see that there is a community here. People are interested in it. And that's how I got into it. You're forced to learn. And when you're forced to learn, it starts to appeal to you. And that's kind of how I got into it to begin with. But I think when there's a tendency at CIA, I think first of all, in the intelligence community, people tend to be very practical, right? This is a tool. It's being used for certain things. What can we do about it, right? I think people tend to view the issue not without prejudice. It's not as if this is evil. I mean, you can make the same case, right? The internet has enabled the theft of a lot of national security secrets, a lot of intellectual property, a lot of nearly every adult American's PII, right? The point is, and you maybe make the case that the internet is optimized for that kind of activity. Conversely, I think ransomware and Colonial Pipeline and even Lazarus prove that Bitcoin, in particular, is not optimized for that kind of activity. I think as Bitcoiners, we tend to we get in a very defensive position, and we have to say, no, you're wrong. It's never used for these things. It's only used for good. And the fact is, that's not true, right? There are criminals using Bitcoin. Bitcoin has been used by terrorist groups. It has at scale. No. The important question is it optimized for that? The answer is no, it's not. And I think if you look over the past 3 years, there's billions of dollars of seizures that prove that point. And the idea that an immutable, transparent ledger is a great place to conduct your mischief just doesn't make any sense. You saw Hamas actually took down their Bitcoin solicitation set, right? I don't know why, but I'm guessing for that very reason. It's not optimized for this kind of behavior. And I think in the intelligence community, if you look at an actor using Bitcoin, it's frankly it's fantastic because all of a sudden you watch in real time what they're doing. And that's just the blockchain, right? When you overlay open source information and even sort of proprietary government data, the blockchain becomes de-anonymized pretty quickly. And that for me is the sort of the central argument against what people like Elizabeth Warren are proposing. The blockchain is simply not a good tool for illicit activity. And there's again billions of dollars of seizures in not only the past couple of years to reinforce that fact.
Yeah, for sure. I never understood that argument. Maybe because I was so. First of all, Ken, I'm super envious that you were overlapping in the intelligence community and with Bitcoin, because like I was, I grew up in Israel, and there you kind of have a draft, but then you get to like test into different units. I was in the intelligence, but that was 2000 to 2004. So I can just imagine now how cool it would be like. But what's really interesting to me is, so it's stupid. Like even Hamas, they literally want cash. The Parliament of Israel passed like a resolution to give them like suitcases of cash, because like even in a practical way, if you want to buy like an RPG to be smuggled from Egypt, how are you going to pay with Bitcoin? Like what are they going to do with Bitcoin? They want dollars. But what's super interesting to me is like, Alex and I got into Bitcoin, and we both believe it's really good for the country, for the US. But I'm excited to hear your perspective and maybe other people in the intelligence community. Do you think that it's a force of good? Are you guys concerned, for example, that China does a lot of the mining, so maybe they could control transactions or something? So just like love to hear your opinion on why Bitcoin is good for specifically for the US, because like it's good for the world. We know why it's a better money. But I've had some conversations, and I think the consensus is that it's good for the US because most of it is here. So as it appreciates, we basically will have a lot of the net worth. But what do you think?
Well, I think first of all, the intelligence community is not a monolith. There's a lot of people involved in it, right? And I would say sort of anecdotally, there's a lot more people that are into Bitcoin. That I think the number, that's not first choice. Second choice would be they're ambivalent about it, right? I don't, a lot, few people they're like I don't, they're not interested in it, which is fine. But it's ambivalence rather than sort of opposition. The intelligence community again, because being a group of very practical people is about what does something do. And I think the whole idea of whether Bitcoin is good for the United States, they'll view it. Can it enhance our national security? That's sort of the question people will ask, right? It's not necessarily, you know, is it are bad people use it or do not bad people use it? Does it enhance national security? And and generally speaking, the intelligence community people don't. These are questions we're looking abroad, right? But people come to their own
And maybe
conclusion.
your personal opinion, like
Yeah,
what do you
but for
think?
sure, and that's my point. So I think I think there's a misconception. I get this in Bitcoin groups all the time. You hear about the Fed and BlackRock and the WEF and somehow CIA are controlling things. And it's you deal with it. The reality is, most people join the intelligence community. I mean, there's not. It's you have it's an eclectic group of sort of independent, spirited people who have a common sense of mission, right? I think people in the intelligence community, overwhelmingly, very few exceptions, take very seriously that oath they take to defend the Constitution when in that first day when you raise your hand. Um, and people join because they want. There's an aspect of creativity, of mission. There's an aspect of adventure. I mean, being an operations officer at CIA is not a desk job, right? You don't spend the first half of your career sitting in an office, opining about the economy. You're out on the street doing stuff. And I think and that reason is why I think it appeals to people. You don't get the sense of people at CIA, certainly in right in operations who want to sort of dominate and control things. It's not the way they are. They're actually, I think there tends to be sort of a live and let live, sort of anti-authoritarian streak to it because the nature of it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a joke, right? But like, I remember when I first started, a very senior officer said, I like my operations officers kind of on the bubble, right? Like, not criminals because they're working for the United States, but you got to have a little bit of that in you because your job is to go out there and and get things that other countries don't want you to have or other groups don't want you to have. So there's an element of sort of I don't say Wild West because it's that sort of detracts from the discipline of it. But there's an element of what's the word? I don't you sort of
Cowboy.
yes, a little bit, right, but in a very disciplined kind of way, right? You're doing things, your job is to do things that the people you're take things from people that want to give it to you. Um, so it attracts a certain kind of person, and it creates a certain kind of culture, and that culture values independence. That culture values sovereignty. Now, people that express itself not necessarily politically, but in how people sort of view the world. This is why I think that Bitcoin appeals to a lot. I know a lot of colleagues who got into it for the same reasons I did, right? Decentralized transactions. Just because I work for the government does not mean I want the government to be able to censor my transactions. Um, just because I work for the government does not mean I want the government to be able to seize my property, whatever it wants to. Just because I work for the government doesn't mean that I don't believe in financial privacy. It doesn't. I think there's a misconception in the Bitcoin community that everybody in the intelligence community thinks all those things are somehow good, right? That the government should have complete control. And that's simply not the case. I'm not saying there aren't elements. It's not monolithic, but generally speaking, those are the kind of people who are in this business. Um, they do take very, very seriously their oath that they take, and they understand. They have a pronounced sense of what the rest of the world is like and what they're doing for the United States. Um, and so, when I hear why would is it incompatible to be a Bitcoiner and be at CIA? The answer is no. Frankly, I think most case officers, operations officers, are natural Bitcoiners because of all the things I talked about.
This is super fascinating. Maybe if I was to bring this back, right, to some of whatever you can say, right, some of the things they've done. I don't know. Can I even dare venture to say would Bitcoin have been a tool to use in some missions or in some CIA or NSA missions or no?
Well, here you
I
go though.
think
For the same reason, it's not good for national security. means it's not. I'm sorry. What I meant to say is, for the same reason it is not good for illicit activity. It's the same reason it's not good for illicit activity. And what CIA officers are doing, it's for the good of the republic, and we're doing it for the right reasons. But somebody else views it as illicit activity, right? And so it's not good. If it's not good for illicit activity for us, the same applies for insert your foreign adversary, right? They have the same tools available. They have the same capabilities, and they're able to draw the same conclusions that we are. So using Bitcoin, I think for any illicit activity is frankly very risky. And certainly when there are so many other options inside traditional system, why would you do something that it's very unforgiving, right? There's no room for error because you can't undo it. The internet's forever, and the blockchain's forever. So even the smallest mistake, maybe you get away with it, but a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, when someone looks, I can tell you from experience, and this is even my experience after CIA, where I am now. Those breadcrumbs are there forever. And do you want to run that risk of having forever discoverable? I think probably not.
I think this answer in and of itself, I almost want to take a mini clip of this answer, because this cements everything you need to know, right? Even if like our CIA doesn't want to use it because it's so traceable, that it in and of itself says it right there. It completely debunks. Again, Director FinCEN was saying, hey, it's used more and more in cybercrimes, and I actually want to ask you about that. But the fact that we're talking about it leaves breadcrumbs, it's there forever, and it's just not a good tool because it's traceable, I think, just debunks everything that this attack from the left and Elizabeth Warren about the technology. In fact, I would venture to say is if I'm an intelligence, if I'm at the FBI, I would want criminals to use Bitcoin, because you can discover them and you can discover the wallets and the networks and donations and
Right.
the entire web, because the web becomes very transparent.
Right.
And it's almost like we're using this as a political tool to fundamentally make America less safe. And that to me is, when we think about senators, and they also take an oath to the Constitution. And it's just a shame that for political and power purposes, you're doing something. And Elizabeth Warren is a smart woman. I just don't believe that she doesn't understand. She understands. She understands exactly what she's doing, but she's doing something that's making America fundamentally less safe. And then right now, getting 20% of Congress or at least the Senate, I should say, to sign up for, co-sign the bill with her. And that's just a shame. That makes me kind of sad.
But I think, Alex, like you and I have talked about this in the past, right? I think that the Bitcoin community needs to do a better job in educating lawmakers. I think, there's no reason to name names, but I suspect I can name one or two senators co-sponsoring that bill that maybe if they'd had different discussions ahead of time, might not have co-sponsored it based on other things they've supported and ways they voted in the past. I think that's part of the problem is that and I will say it's a little bit it's not a very our story's harder to tell than theirs. It's used for illicit activities. Yeah, it is. We admit that, right? Okay. Next paragraph though, is it optimized for that, and is that its primary use? I think that Chain Analysis, a company that we know very well and does great work, puts out their report, and it's less than 1% of transactions are used in illicit activity, and that's that's of a database of of addresses associated with illicit activity, right? But it's very easy to tell a story of yes, it is. It's useless activity. Yeah, it is. See, here's an example of that. It was used for this. All true. Our story is a lot more sort of. There's the philosophical aspect to it. It's a bigger picture strategic story, which is one of the reasons I think that we've talked about this in the past. I talked about this a lot. That having the political discussion about the future of blockchain technology in general in the United States should not be dominated by regulators. It needs to be dominated by policymakers with a different broader perspective of the world. Regulators, they look at things like through their microscope, and their job is to apply law, right? And they'll find ways to apply law. That's what they do, right? They will find ways to apply law to something. Whereas policymakers and people view the world from the broader perspective, and I add intelligence officer to that, right? Through Prism. right? It's not a microscope; it's a prism. You turn it, you rotate it. It looks different from each perspective, and you get a global idea of what this technology can do. And yeah, there are a few flaws in that prism, but generally speaking, just like the internet, right? No one's talking about banning the internet for all the horrible scams, theft of secrets, property that happen. Think about all the horrible things that happen online every single day. No one's talking about banning the internet. You have a new technology that's just, we'll talk just from a technology perspective, right? That offers so much, and yet we're in the same discussion. We're so quick to ban it because it threatens certain interests, and it's very just easy to say, well, it's damaging, so we have to ban it
Yeah, I mean,
because we haven't told a good story.
but I really like your point about not even arguing on the level of, like, of course it's used for illicit activity, right? Just like cash is used for illicit activity. Internet, right? We could say that it's gated and you have to KYC before you post anything on the internet. Otherwise, you go to jail. Guess what? You don't get to collect tax revenue. There's a reason why all the top tech companies are in the US. Like, guys, have you ever thought about it? They're not in Singapore. They're definitely not in Europe. So it's like there's something about this freedom to express oneself, and I think the lawmakers in the U.S. actually have been very forward looking with I forget the name of the law that basically treats user generated content as something that you cannot be liable for.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's genius, right? It's like,
The idea that code is speech, right? Code is speech. This whole
exactly,
idea.
code is speech. So I'm actually very bullish, and to your point, Ken, like the ideal politician will want to improve the life of their constituents, so they would understand that putting restrictions on Bitcoin is just doesn't make any sense. But I don't know, I always, like, sometimes I look at the politicians and I'm like, oh my god, these are the people deciding, but then somehow it works out, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think behind it there's really a sort of fundamental difference of opinion about what what financial sovereignty should be in the United States, and is there financial sovereignty? Financial privacy is dead right now; it doesn't exist. And are we? Should the government allow American citizens to possess this reserve asset that is you can self custody, and we can't easily take it from you. We want them. Do we want American citizens to have that? And I think there's different spinning about that. I think the discussion about dollar dominance, I think it's just a red herring. Bitcoin is the greatest threat to dollar dominance is not Bitcoin, right? It's how we treat the dollar. And I think a lot of the discussion in Washington about dollar dominance and you know and how Bitcoin is used in criminal activity is generated by a cadre of people. Since 2001, there's a whole sort of industry in Washington of people in sanctions whose job is to weaponize the dollar. And I'm not here to say that like there's no space for that. I think there is, but that becomes sort of a self-licking ice cream cone, right? You always want to apply your authority, right? And that I think threatens dollar dominance a lot more than this now $1 trillion asset that may or may not become a global standard. I don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But dollar dominant, I think the U.S. dollar was dominant because it was globally reliable. There was significant economic activity behind it. It was liquid. This is why the dollar became the dominant currency. It's not because people could tinker with it from Washington. I think that's a byproduct of that is at the end of the day harming the future of dollar dominance a lot more than Bitcoin ever could. And not to mention printing a lot of it, lots, tons.
And the printer goes burr, as they say. You had a really good point about the dollar. The threat to the dollar dominance isn't Bitcoin; it's weaponizing of the dollar. And so, I have had a kind of internal debate about this. On one hand, um, sorry, I'm kind of thinking aloud. There's a point I want to bring up. I'm changing the direction of my question
Good,
because
I'm
I
with
want to
you.
bring up something interesting. But there's this debate about, okay, well, we have this reserve currency. And sure, we don't want terrorists and Hamas and ISIS and all these guys to use any currency, or rogue nations, North Korea, we call it Russia right now. Although Russia, I'm from Ukraine, so like my bias is against Russia and for sure against Putin. But it's a little gray if I'm honest, right? It's not black and white. And so it's a continuous weaponization of the dollar. And Shimon and I talk about this a lot. Is if you want to have a reserve currency, ultimately you must have a free and open capital system. Because
Right.
if there's another free and open capital system, it just makes sense to move fundamental trading into that system versus yours, because you have friction and they don't. And so ultimately, I think trade finds the currency and the system with the least amount of friction, well, because it's conducive to trade. I think it's kind of definitional. And so for us to be able to put capital controls or weaponization, we're starting to feel this pushback. The problem in current geopolitics is that we're the cleanest dirty shirt, and
That's right.
so where are you going to go? You're going to go to the Chinese yuan, and the Chinese economy is crumbling. They
Yep.
completely over leverage their real estate. Are you going to go to the euro? They haven't had any innovation since God knows when. I mean, like really, the Europe hasn't produced anything. Are you going to go
Stagnating. Yep.
to Exactly. There's no. Are you going to go to are you going to go to Japan where they have yield curve control for forever? So it's there's no other true alternative. But I think Bitcoin is the only one really. And again, I'm not even saying that Bitcoin is gonna kind of dispose of the dollar as a reserve currency. I mean, maybe in 100 years, 50 years. It's too volatile now, too unstable. It's still too young. But here's an interesting thought I want to ask you about.
Mhm.
Okay, let's all dive into a world of miners. There are so how do miners work? You have a mining company that actually deploys like ASICs and mining machines that are mining Bitcoin. And they typically point their miners into a pool. The pool, pulls the transactions, pulls the miners. They use the hash power to mine another block, and block attaches. Next block, wins, attaches to that, and so on and so forth. Miners have the ability to see transactions that hit OFAC lists. Okay, and the U.S. government, and there's for many years there have been discussions about the U.S. government imposing current rules. In fact, I think a woman, Carol House, testified in Congress a couple of days ago about saying, hey, well, we currently have sanction rules and we can push miners to enforce or be OFAC compliant, not to mine OFAC transactions. I don't know how deeply you know miners, what your take is there. I have my own biases kind of for that, but maybe I can raise it to you and Shimon for discussion. Can we and should we impose U.S. miners not to mine non-OFAC compliant transactions?
So I'd read, maybe it was from Compass, someone did a study about if that were to happen in the United States, would transactions still process? And I think whoever did the study came up with like it would take 24 hours for a transaction to go through if all U.S. based mining operations were compliant and institute that rule. But the transactions are still gonna are ultimately going to be processed, and you can make the case that shouldn't mean we shouldn't do it. But I think also, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not an expert in mining, but miners create blocks, but nodes. The transactions are approved by nodes, right? Am I wrong?
The transactions are pushed to the nodes. For
Yeah.
me, this is let's say a U.S. miner doesn't mine the block,
Right.
and a Chinese miner does. So the U.S. miner is going to mine the next block, de facto
Still mine the
approving the
block.
previous block.
Yeah, you're still validating it. Right.
So
Who's going to
just
confirm
because
it, right?
unless everyone in the world doesn't do it, right? And that's very, very hard to get everyone to
I don't.
collude on the
Uh,
same.
I don't know why you guys think this is important because I think that all of the OFAC stuff is controlled at the endpoint. So, like, all the exchanges and stuff, they're the ones basically when it touches the banking system. And so, no, I'm speaking in terms of enforcement. So, like, if the government wants to enforce it, it can enforce it on its feet. But, like, with minors, like, what does it matter? Because even if nobody in the US does any transactions, if you put a high enough fee, as long as you have some miners in Iran,
Exactly.
eventually they'll win the block and they'll prioritize these off OFAC transactions. So that's why I don't think
But
it's.
because this is important because it's actually being talked about in Congress right now. And some people are trying to push this into law of saying, well, this is the way we're gonna make sure the U.S. miners are not mining OFAC transactions. And I think it's a complete misnomer. and I'm
So I
not sure
guess I don't
miners will actually
care.
go
It
for that.
doesn't matter. So what if they pass a law? This reminds me of like a half a joke. The Israeli government, Israel is in the middle of the war now, and they passed a resolution that if somebody else recognizes a Palestinian state unilaterally, the U.S. government is like the Israeli government is against that, and people are like, I don't think you understand what unilaterally means. Like, you can pass any resolution you want, but but it's the same here. It's like, okay, so you can say that minors in the U.S. cannot, mine this. So what?
No, so that's it. I mean, look, this is I'm just raising something that's being talked about. This is kind of tip of the spear in terms of U.S. policy and how they're trying to get their hands around, terror and illicit financing in OPEC because a few days ago, Gary Gensler, I don't know if you guys have seen, he was on CNBC and actually, Joe, I forget his last name, but he was telling him that, hey, you're using this much is used for this activity and this much is used for
Right.
this activity in the dollar. And Gary came out and said that the largest share of cyber crimes, of cyber ransomware, is in cryptocurrency, which I didn't know, and I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, I'm sure he's not. They typically don't lie about these kind of stats. They just frame them in a very biased way. But I was surprised by that, right? And so now there's an attack from a mining perspective of what should we do with the miners and can we tell miners? But maybe let's kind of pivot to. I had no idea the largest share was using cryptocurrencies, and then if they're not conducive, I don't understand why a cyber ransomware in crypto, because again, you can't trace it. Like the Colonial Pipeline is a great example. When they took a lot of money, I forgot how many millions, and then later on, then line were found out, discovered, and they actually found the people with the wallets.
Yeah.
So I don't know why cyber criminals. I guess maybe because it's easier to onboard and offboard once you're in cyberland than the dollar.
If you lock up someone's computer with, if you lock up someone's network, what's the fastest way to pay them, right? Is through crypto, and it is. But again, you could speak there's a larger problem. Like it's not as if the U.S. government doesn't have a good idea who these people are, right? These are transnational groups that live in countries, and the problem you'll solve ransomware not by banning Bitcoin, but by like constructive engagement with countries. Even there are some countries that maybe we don't like that would not be considered our allies. But you beat it through constructive engagement with countries, right? How many of these guys have been arrested as they go on vacation, to Thailand or whatever? You have to increase the cost of what they do. That's how you beat it. If not Bitcoin, yeah, there'll be other tools. And again, I think we shouldn't get too bogged down. And yes, do ransomware actors use demand payment crypto? They do, and that's something that that we need to deal with. As maybe as an industry, but certainly as a country. But does that mean? But they also use the internet. They use all kinds of other things. So does that mean that we should ban this technology because some Eurasian ransom groups, ask for payment in Bitcoin or Monero or whatever, to unlock your networks? I mean, you can make the case that that's a fundamental policy question. I think if you put on the scales of the advantages for this technology and also what Bitcoin represents as a store of wealth and the whole spiel, we all know it, versus the negative impact of ransomware actors, which is negative. It's a bad thing. Still, the scales tell me that there's still more to be gained as a society from allowing people to use this technology for its stated purpose, and we have other tools to deal with ransomware.
Ken, did you know that 100% of cyber ransomware is done using the internet? Just wanted to put that stat out there.
I don't know how else you would do it.
No, but guys, if we didn't store information on computers, then it
Yeah,
couldn't be stolen. You would have to hold the files drag them from a person's office. So let's ban computers.
computers are the largest share of cyber ransomware.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, we shouldn't as an industry get too bogged down in like, yeah, but I mean it is, but there are other tools, right? There are other. I mean, yeah, it's like everything else. Like the world didn't start. Online criminal activity didn't begin in January, whenever it was, January 2009, when like Satoshi hit that first transaction. There all kinds of bad stuff happened before that, right? And if you ban it, it'll still happen. But with that first transaction also opened up a whole new world for people, for their financial sovereignty and freedom, which I think is you know is worthy. And I think that if we're not mature enough as a government, as a political class, to deal with the problems and some of the negative side effects of this, wow, that's complete, it's utter failure, right? It's utter failure if we can't find a way to deal with these issues, and you do it honestly. But you gain, you say you catch more flies with honey, right? Like, I think that there's a lot of people in the industry that would be very supportive of engaging with government entities to help fix some of these problems if there wasn't this constant sort of thinking that the government ultimately is out to get you. And I think on the regulator side, I mean, the industry's not been proven wrong. The regulators have not proven to be friends of the industry. They don't like it for various reasons. Um, and back to my previous point, this is why we need to have a different part of the political class needs to be having this discussion about how we treat this asset, and whether we and what kind of role it plays in our future. But for the negative after effects, yeah, we have other tools for that, and we should deploy them like we deploy them to deal with the after effects of all kinds of other technologies.
So maybe we can kind of turn towards a positive note from all this negative stuff about like legislation and criminals. So, what is the most exciting thing about Bitcoin? Let's say in the next couple of years or 10 years, maybe. What do we all think are we most excited about? For me, I can start by saying my thesis, which is like money is basically like a signal system, and because the governments are distorting it by having this clean signal, so you can have better pricing of investments, everything will be much more efficient. I think we can just accelerate technological development by a lot. Like I've been getting into this e-accelerationist movement, which basically says, yeah, let's produce more energy, let's consume more energy, let's use energy to clean up the environment, suck
Yeah.
CO2 from the air to solve climate change. Like we can basically do all these things without any technological breakthrough. We just need as humanity to like invest in the right things. And so I hope that Bitcoin, and to your guys' point, we are the cleanest dirty shirt. Like in all the other governments are worse, all the other economies are worse. But I think we can just be so much better. But I would love to hear and what are you excited about?
So I think I've actually I've nerded out. I've been like reading like Marco Paez's pieces on. I've really nerded out on sort of things she writes about Bitcoin and the environment. I have some friends who are involved in Bitcoin mining in Africa. I think the potential for the energy grid is tremendous. I love it. Because again, I'm of the mindset that when you look at inputs in national policy and economic prosperity, energy matters, and energy is a primary input. So I think that both in the United States, the potential for Bitcoin to help modernize and stabilize grids is tremendous, and overseas, I think it offers tremendous possibilities for places where right now it's not economical to bring power. And I think that matters. I think that we often we get the sense that we're asking the developing world to stay undeveloped of you know because of carbon issues. They're not going to do that. Um, I think Bitcoin mining offers these places, these countries, these sometimes very isolated places, the opportunity to enjoy some of the benefits of cheap power that we have in the West. So I strongly believe in that. I hate this sounds. I know you're supposed to be positive, but fundamentally, yeah, I get very excited about the technology. I'm like all into like Nostr now, like getting into some of these groups, learning about ARC and Cashew, and I think it's all great stuff. But my fundamentally for me, Bitcoin still remains. I won't use the word life preserver, but it remains a potential. It remains a means of protecting my wealth. Um, in should we arrive at some kind of financial calamity in the United States? Um, again, I think you can't help but leave your hat on when you look at if we were conducting analysis of a different country and you put the same inputs in debt GDP ratio, political division, all these sorts of things. An analyst might say, "Wow, this country has some significant challenges over the next decade. How are they going to deal with it?" And and it's again, I've born and raised in the United States. I served this country. I really only I have a child. I passionately want to see the United States succeed, in whatever form that takes. But I think that form, either Bitcoin will be a catalyst to bring us to a better place, or it'll be the tool that some of us who have foresight to see it will use when there are issues to help rebuild. Um, that's why that's why I own it. That's why I think that's its fundamental use case, for me. I think it has a lot. There's a lot of other things it offers, but at its core, right? This is why I own it. This is why I believe, and this is why I think it is in our interest to allow other Americans to own it and use it and to learn about it as well. Because again, the more people that have that sort of that that safety space, it pushes off the inevitability, the potential. I mean, I won't say inevitability, but it pushes off the potential of that calamity happening, right? Because people are better positioned, right? You put people in a position where they're in debt, where they're being crushed by inflation. Yeah, and then that's when you have political strife. That's when you have all kinds of bank runs. Pick your input. But when they have this sort of the safety net of an asset that they know will stand the test of time and will survive, will weather the storm, you all of a sudden bring a sense of calm to the society, and I think that's important.
I think we've been fairly lucky in the
And I'm very
U.S.
positive
to.
about that.
Well, that's very positive. I love it. I think we're very positive. We're very lucky in the U.S. not to experience. We haven't really experienced war in our soil. We haven't really experienced, say, Pearl Harbor, maybe, right, in the last, 100 years or something along those lines. We haven't really experienced serious social strife since, call it, the civil rights movement. But other countries have experienced, at least, and we haven't experienced it from a financial perspective. Like,
Yeah.
finances haven't really caused, social strife. But I'm sure, as both of you can attest, and I'm not trying to take us negatively. I actually want to hear some stories. Like, we can end on some interesting stories, Ken, from your background, whatever you can share. Maybe the craziest story, the funniest story, something along those lines, just to get you thinking while I'm talking. But we a lot of intelligence agencies use financial tools to stir up uncertainty within countries. I mean, the clearest example is Ukraine and Russia, and what Putin has done with Maidan and others, and putting governments into power that are oppressing the majority, and so on and so forth. I mean, we've done this. This has been our playbook for years in the U.S. But we haven't really experienced it on our soil. And I like your point of, the more people get into Bitcoin, the more they have this hedge, the more that we become more resilient as a country. It's
Yep.
actually, I've never quite heard this angle before. It's a very interesting angle. And I wish not only that more, call it, lower socioeconomical status folks were educated about investing, but also educated about investing in different assets, alternative assets, such as Bitcoin, for example. I know that for our listeners, sometimes we hear comments of, enough about Bitcoin, but guys, we're very passionate about it, not because we're some crypto boys. I mean, again, Ken is over 20 years experience in the agency. Nobody, I think, will confuse Ken here as some sort of crypto bro, shilling Dogecoin or whatnot. But right, this is serious stuff, and Shimo and I are both immigrants to this country. We love this country for what it is and for what the life it's given us, and I think we share your passion for wanting America to succeed, and we really do. And it's a shame that, instead of giving people a choice of this, again, I also believe in illuminating asset that truly is a lifeboat in many ways. I'm not saying put 100% of your wealth, but put 5 or 10, right? So that in case something happens, and I think that 5 or 10 will balloon to close to 50 and more really quickly
Yeah.
for most people. But in case something happens, you have this asset that's saving you. But we haven't really faced financial strife, and we haven't really faced social strife. But I feel like we're like on the precipice of it. It started with Occupy Wall Street. Elizabeth Warren, by the way, was in Occupy Wall Street against the
Yeah.
banks. And now, how quickly she's come around to protect them. but we have this populist movement. The left is becoming more left, the right is becoming more right. And I think a lot of it is caused because of financial imbalance between the top 1% and the bottom, call it whatever it is. And it's a shame that this is our country's getting rocked kind of back and forth. I feel like volatility is getting more and more and more. And we're entering an election with two very unpopular candidates. If it's Biden, Trump, that no one really wants to see run. I don't think from any side, the majority doesn't want to see them. And we're going to be forced into a poor choice with poor economic conditions. And it's, I'm buy Bitcoin, folks. Buy Bitcoin. This scenario, I'm not trying to be a dooms, I'm always an optimistic when I think, but it's the risks are higher than normal. I'll leave it like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the system is incredibly resilient. And I think a lot of that's because we're resting on the laurels of, of 50 years of American economic might. Um, but yeah, and people, I think there's also in the political class, there's a tendency, people sort of play with these things, like Stoke. When you see when real strife and real chaos hits societies, it can be very fast and it's very ugly. And this is what frightens me. And I'm not saying that I think this is going to happen. But there's certainly potential for it to happen. I mean, we saw it, but 2 years ago, cities burning. It can't happen. I mean, it does happen. It's sometimes hard to control, and we shouldn't also forget that we do have adversaries. We have a tendency. I see even among Bitcoiners to blame Washington for everything in the world, and the reality is I'm sorry, but there are countries out there that just fundamentally don't wish us well. That maybe take advantage of some of these problems. And so I agree with everything you said. I think that I don't think we're this cycle. We're going to see cooler heads prevail. I just don't see it happening. It doesn't mean that the world's going to collapse. But we need to. There's a certain arrogance among Westerners, right? They were sort of immune from history, and we shouldn't be. If you have that perspective that you're sort of immune from all the forces that have affected every other country throughout history, you're asking for it. And wise statesmen, I think recognize that. Sometimes statesmen that are less wise don't, and you find yourself in difficult positions.
And why don't we wrap with what I try to tee up a little bit? Let's move off of Bitcoin, move off on a maybe a positive or a lighter note, a more interesting note. Is there anything you can share from your storied background? The craziest, funniest, whatever you can share, most interesting, serendipitous story that you think that people will enjoy hearing.
I mean, it's. I probably should have thought about this more.
I'm putting you on the spot. Don't worry.
I think that there's. I mean, I'll say there's something. Well, when you're living in developing countries, there's something to be said for sort of the chaos in everyday life. I've lived in places where I had car contact every single day for 2 or 3 years, right? Every single day I had, contact with another vehicle, things like that.
Like you're talking about accident.
Every day. I would say over the arc nearly every day, sometimes twice a day. So there's a, and again, it's something that I think appeals to a lot of CI officers. There's a certain charm in the chaos of living in, and there's actually a chaos from our perspective. There's a certain sort of rhythm to it when you're in developing countries, and it's kind of funny. You pick up things like in some countries, you can do whatever you want, just don't criticize the government. And you live like that for years, right? And in this chaos, people are building and they're doing all kinds of crazy things. And then you come home and you can write letters to the editor, but if you paint your door red, the HOA will sue you and harass you, and you know what I mean? And you're like, okay, I kind of miss being able to do whatever I wanted, and without just messing with the government. But what it is, but I will say one thing this career gives you is you meet there's some really amazing, interesting people out there in the world. Whether it's partner countries you work with, or some of the people you meet through the course of business that have just amazing stories. This is why, again, I say to people, I get asked, especially because I'm on LinkedIn now, and I'm sort of out there. People hit me up and ask me about it, and it's a tremendous career, and you get to do things that And maybe Shimon said some experiences that you just can't do in a regular job. And you don't get paid. I mean, government employees, officers, get decent. GS officers, right? We get paid decently. With benefits and that kind of thing. And it's you live fine. You live overseas. You're living in talk about like subsidized housing, right? Because you're in an embassy and you're living in government housing. And you get some advantage of that. But there's if you spend enough time in this business, it just, the characters and the experiences they're just kind of like their own. They're hard to describe. I mean, there are times I'll say this. There are times when I was at CIA where you're like in a negative way. You're like, oh my god, this is CIA. And other times you're like, oh wow, this is CIA. You know what I mean? It's the two times you're like, God Almighty, what are we doing? And other times you're like, oh, all right, this is what we're doing. Cool. It's never mundane. Um, you still have to do timesheets. You still have mundane activities, but over the course of a career, it is definitely not mundane, and it gives you access to perspectives and experiences that other careers just don't give you, just by the nature of it, right? I mean, it could, but you have to be like a criminal, like an international criminal to be able to do it. And this way, you get to experience those all with the sort of the moral benefit of actually serving your country.
Yeah, we always used to say that. We would say like, this is fun. It's like we get, first of all, in Israel, it's funny because you don't get paid, because part of the draft is like, my salary was like $100 per month. And it was like living with my parents. And I was like an analyst. I wasn't doing anything like in the field or anything, but it was just funny that like the peers were like these serious career people from like the US or whatever. And you're just this kid. But yeah, like you get to do that stuff. It's so funny. But I would just think that what I didn't like about it is that at the end of the day, you work for the government, and the Israeli government, I really kind of didn't agree with their direction. So it was hard for me to stay, because it's not like here where governments just change, and you can have a Democrat and Republican. There, it's pretty much like one direction, and it's not
Yeah.
it's not becoming better. So I had to leave. But sometimes I'm thinking like, what would have been if I stayed? Like, probably, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there are sacrifices to it. I mean, you're working a job where you can't. It's drove my mother too, but drove my wife crazy. We get home. How was your day? It's fine. you know, you're out really late. No, it's fine. It's good. Great day. And you just there's certainly it's just the nature of it, and it's not necessarily to be spooky. It's just the nature of working in that kind of line of work, right? There are these things you don't talk about outside the office and outside of their colleagues, and they're also because of the nature of it, there is a tendency to like it's just sort of inertia. You end up having your friends or your colleagues, in a large part, because again, it's just you spend time with them, you have similar experiences, and you have to really work at having relationships outside that circle, just by the nature of it, because everything else, you flock to people where you can share experiences and who kind of understand you, and that's hard to find someone when you're a CI officer who shares those things with you. So this is why when you do leave, it is again. I left. It's the important thing is to leave happy. I left on a really high note. I walked out that door like in happy and proud and just really happy I did it. But it is a breath of fresh air to get out, and then you see, from this in the same sense, like you have great insights in the world, but also you do live in a bubble, and you see, like I see with my current job now, the rest of the world knows a lot about the rest of the world as well. Their experiences and insights that people who work for governments just aren't going to have experience they don't have. And I think that this is it's probably an internal challenge. How do you combine those two things? But you know you there there's a lot to be gained when you leave government service and you open yourself up to new experiences. It really has been a breath of fresh air. It allows you to do things, to study things that you just don't have time for or inclination to do when you're working in a place like CIA, like Bitcoin, right? I got into it, but it's only been since I left where I really started going to meetups, and really sort of got into it, and and it sort of expanded my understanding of what it is and what it does, and frankly why I'm here now, right? I never would have been here a year ago talking to you guys about this. I just didn't have the background, and I liked it, but it wasn't my convictions were they were different. But the more you get into it, the more it speaks to you, and it's hard to do when you're in government. When you get out, you get new experiences, and you get to do things like this, and it's cool. But I think it contribute to humanity in a different way.
That's awesome. Well, Ken, this was an absolute pleasure. Can you tell our audience how to find you, how to get in touch with you, your work,
If you
Yeah,
want.
what's
if you
that?
want them to get in
Yeah,
touch?
I'm on LinkedIn. My Twitter, I do have an Twitter account. It's at Bayman11771. That's me. I tweet sometimes, and also the same handle on Noster. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah,
I've
we'll
been
definitely.
focusing a lot on Noster lately because trying to
Noster is great. No, like
trying to give love to the developers and to help that basic community grow.
absolutely. Well, thank you again, and hope to have you back on the show pretty soon.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. It's been great.
Thank